Here's an idea that a friend mentioned to me once, and it may be worth thinking about. While we may believe something to be true, knowledge has no effect on our life until we trust it enough to act on it. And to act on that trust, we need the knowledge to be credible. Credibility is more than proving what we observe. Evidence from Edo knowledge is credible based on the guidelines of science. But what about evidence from Gnosis knowledge? What makes the evidence of our sixth sense credible enough for us to trust it? This idea of evidence introduces us to the word faith. We hear this word a lot, but what exactly is faith? Where does faith come from, and how does faith fit in this discussion of knowledge and truth? Before we discuss competing worldviews on how knowledge and faith work in trusting what is true, let me clarify what I mean by faith. Here we are talking about faith in general, not related to any particular faith or religion. Faith is defined as the evidence or proof that something we can't see or measure physically actually exists. That proof is how we know, gnosis know, that it is true. In other words, faith is the evidence that we cannot physically observe. Again, faith is basically the evidence that comes to us in our gnosis knowledge. Many don't realize it, but we all use faith as the evidence for what we think is true. Interestingly enough, we will see later on in this session that faith evidence is not necessarily any weaker or less believable than evidence that is collected through scientific physical measurements. So all faith has a distinct source, but a source we cannot observe with our physical senses. All people use gnosis knowledge, and this knowledge comes from somewhere. So everyone, whether they always recognize it or not, have faith in something. Everyone must rely on or trust some source for all of their gnosis knowledge. We will continue to study this more, but it's important that you not limit your idea of faith by the most common context for faith, such as religion. So here's an interesting and important corollary to what we've been talking about. Some people think that if you use scientific measurements to prove something, you don't have to trust anyone's word about whether or not the conclusion is true. But if you think about it, how do you know that the person who made those scientific instruments did it properly? Are they really as precise and accurate as you think they are? And then how do you know? Also, if their performance is based on other data or calibration adjustments, how do you know that those other data were collected and analyzed properly by someone, or that the calibration adjustments were done properly by someone? And if you think about it a little more philosophically, how do you know that the scientific principles upon which all of your analysis is based are all consistent and do not change with time and circumstances? What is your basis for believing that? Who told you that that is true? Like maybe a high school science teacher or maybe a college professor. What makes us decide to trust them, and then who did they trust? Isn't this also a matter of faith? Though this may call into question the credibility of objective science, are these not good and important questions to ask? In other words, everything is ultimately based on who you trust, whether that person be the designer or manufacturer of the scientific instruments that you're using, or the one who is responsible for concluding or even maintaining the scientific principles that you use to analyze the measurements that you collect. So if someone says, I don't need faith, I have science, are they thinking about this deeply enough? And can we then say that all Edo knowledge is built on top of Gnosis knowledge?